Alafia, I'm Dr. Gloria Lattimore Peace, host and producer of OmniU Presents the H3O Art of Life show. And I am very happy today to welcome my guest, Kamene, Kaba Kamene. I'm going to get used to not calling you Booker T. Coleman Jr. And I guess that it'll take a moment, but for the opening, before I formally greet you, I want to say to the audience that I'm so glad to have this particular guest here at this time, because the topic is, what do you know about African education? And we could not have a better person to discuss this subject. This man is a long-time educator. He's a scholar. He is a disciple of John Henry Clark. He comes from the right places. He's studying the right things, and he's doing the right things. And today we're going to talk about education, specifically African-centered education, and I'm going to ask him a barrage of questions all at the same time. So first I will greet you, Kaba Kamene. How are you today?
Dr. Peace, I'm doing fine. I thank you so much for inviting me to your program.
Well, I thank you so much for coming all the way from New York to give a lecture here and to do workshops on the Dogon. I think, you know, you're doing absolutely the right thing, and there ought to be more of you doing what you do, because you know that our youth, the flyer that circulated about your presentations here in Chicago this time are talking about our youth are in trouble. And I think that we don't really know to what extent the education of our youth has created the problems that they have. And especially a point I want to make is that our youth are being increasingly educated by popular culture. Popular culture such as the new movie Hustle and Flow. You know, our children are learning values and content that if we chose, we would not have them be exposed to at all, or certainly we would edit and interpret what it is that they are receiving. So we have a formidable enemy in the media, not only film, but also the TV shows, you know, the musical TV shows, the music itself. I mean, our young people are inundated with images and content that makes the job that you are trying to do so hard, and there ought to be more of you. So I commend you for this work, and keep on keeping on. Now, you have 3 or 4 questions here, such as what is an African-centered education? It is not popular culture. So what is an African-centered education for our viewers?
In preparing to come here to the Chicago family, I read a book, or I should say I reread a book, the inclusion and infusion of African and African-American centered content. It was the proceedings of a conference in 1989 in Atlanta, Georgia. Asa Hilliard was one of the main conveners. Dr. Lucretia Payton was another, and also our brother Obadeli Williams. And this happened in 1989. And I particularly look at the work of Dr. Wade Nobles, because he clearly is one of the foremost theoreticians. As Dr. Diop teaches us, there's the theoretician, there's the practitioner. And Dr. Wade Nobles laying out the theory of what an African-centered curriculum is. The role that culture plays in education. There is no education that is not cultural. It's according to whose culture you're dealing with.
Right.
And as you were opening in your discussion, in your remarks about the role that the popular culture has played, I don't know if here in Chicago, but I know in New York there is a computer game that's called Grand Theft Auto.
I've heard of it.
Now, Grand Theft Auto, of course, now you have the San Andreas one that was really, you know, pulled back because of the derogatory statements towards people of Haitian descent. But they also found now that the Grand Theft Auto, there are things that you can do within the computer where there are sexually suggestive games that you can play with Grand Theft Auto. I mean, this is how deep it is. That the game itself comes at you one way, but those that know how to manipulate certain things can create an entirely another kind of game. And of course, our children, being inquisitive and brilliant as they are, everybody's going to go to that. So that even with that, I remember growing up, my mother used to say, don't talk to strangers in the street. The computer is now to the point where if you have a computer in your bedroom, there are strangers in your bedroom. There are strangers in our house. They're on the internet. Our children are being bombarded. This past year, I taught whole life management to children who were in what we call middle school, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And part of what I did was a life science with them. I call it self-science, where we just talked about certain things and the things that our children are exposed to. And they live in a coded world. They don't speak to adults on these issues, only if they have a certain level of trust, respect for you, and grounded in you and you're grounded in them. There are things that our children are being bombarded with constantly within our community. And this is what they are considering to be their education. And culture plays a central part. It is what Dr. Wade Nobles calls ubiquitous. It is in every part and parcel of what you're experiencing. It's the invisible process by which you live and you learn, and the whole idea is three things basically in school. What I'm looking for in our children is to facilitate them developing character, commitment, and consciousness. Those are the three things as outlined by Dr. Wade Nobles in the theory of what every child should be going through. And the bottom line is that our children, the character, when you look around, okay, we do know that there are individuals in our community that reflect what they may have seen in Hustle and Flow. But I want to see a balance. There's many more out there that are working hard every day, making it possible for us to be who we are as a people and who have made us who we are as a people. We don't see them. There's no balance. So our children are beginning to look at the illusion, and the illusion is becoming their reality. And although it's an illusion, if it becomes your reality, it's a reality. You make it a reality. And so that when they go to a movie to see Hustle and Flow, that becomes their reality. But there's a whole nother reality out here. The whole idea of commitment, a work ethic, the idea of we come from a people who built pyramids, who created concepts of God, who created an entire jurisprudence system of judging and made ma'at, that symbol of righteousness and justice. We started the healing arts. You know, it's all there. Yet our children are not given that balance. They're not looking at the world through their own eyes. It's equivalent to building a house, and because you are the builder of the house, you create your window and you look out into your environment through that window. Now, through time, there are people who have built adjacent to your house, and now they are looking at their environment from their window. The only problem is that now they have dragged us from our room into their room, and they're making us look at the environment through their window. And this is what John Henry Clark taught us, that culture is that vehicle that you use, that invisible vehicle that you use that allows to become the window of your world. If you want to live in that room looking at the world through that window, that's your business. But you have no right to drag me there, make me look at the world. I have my window. It's the original window. It's the window that was there long before that other side of the building was ever built. We have a right to look at the world through our own eyes, to interpret the world through our own eyes.
We have an obligation,
yes, we do,
to look at the world through our own eyes. You made me think about a book, Subliminal Seduction. This book, I hope is still available in the libraries. It's a very important book because it shows you how everyday advertisements are filled with sexual connotations. A plate of spaghetti and meatballs, when you study it closely, you will see figures in it. A glass of beverage, when you study it closely, you will see people copulating in the beverage. Only someone who is aware and who is looking can help you to see, but not the fact that you don't see it, that you think you don't see it, does not mean that the mind does not see it. Because the mind will pick up the image, the inference, even when the human eye glosses over it and sees only a plate of spaghetti and meatballs or a beverage with ice cubes in it. And so it's very important that we understand that, as you said, this game has embedded in it other images which can be accessed and bring another message and you know, seduce our children into concentrating on erotic things, causing them to have ideas and thoughts very often way too early for them to have any control over those ideas and thoughts or to have any means of managing those ideas and thoughts. So you're quite right. We had a much broader view of this world, this narrow view that it's almost like a cultural glaucoma. In glaucoma, you know, the field of vision gradually narrows, where before you could just see, you know, around you without looking. You wouldn't have to turn to right or left in order, or to look up and down. You could see a certain amount of distance up or downward while you're still looking ahead. When you have glaucoma, if you want to see on the right side, you've got to turn your head. If you want to see up, you've got to look up. And gradually, that field of vision narrows down until it is only a dot, and finally the dot goes out. And so if you understand that our field of vision is so narrowed and so focused on something so much that is so unlike who we are as a people, that it is creating changes in us. And I don't know if these can be called mutations, but I know I'm seeing a lot that I don't want to see in our people.
And it's there. And that is exactly what this system, this educational system, is doing to our children. And it's coming through the concept of, and again, I want to be careful how I speak, because I know that Chicago has their way and New York has their way, but I'm pretty sure it's very similar in that in New York City, education now is based on you passing a test. When I was coming up, they said, get a good education, you get a good job. It's not even about getting a good job anymore. Get a good education so you can pass a test. And the idea is to, in a superficial way, be able to regurgitate information that in and of itself, the standardized test in no way measures someone's intellect, because you don't have to. There are two ways you can pass a standardized test. I speak of the multiple choice. That is if you know the right answer and if you know all the wrong answers. But you don't have to know the answer, and you don't have to show that you know what to do with what you know. All you got to do is pick the right answer. And this is what our children are being moved to. So when you speak of that intellectual glaucoma, that's what's happening now. Because a standardized test is the lowest form of knowing something. Rote memory, although very important, it has its place. It is the basis upon which the Dogon built. They had Jiriso. Jiriso was the word in the front. That was the superficial word. That's the word that you teach a kindergarten child, going straight up maybe through high school. And that's the front word. When you speak of glaucoma, that's a great analogy, because that's very much like what it is. You can only see things for what's right in front of you. That's the jiriso. When you get to a certain point of maturity and knowledge and wisdom, when you got that jiriso in place, then what happened was you were introduced to the beniso. Beniso was the words on the side. So now, what became very straightforward now opened up to your peripheral vision. So now you saw the same thing, but you saw it from a wider perspective now, because your maturity level is getting deeper. And I'm thinking of your analogy because we're literally going backwards with our children. Because now when you get the beniso in place, when you get that next level, that you not only see the front word, but you see the side word, and the side words are built with what you know on the front word. You can't get to the side word without going through the front word. So one is built on the other. So you can see that consciousness, that third aspect that Dr. Wade Nobles talks about, that consciousness level is constantly growing. The point is the same. It's just that your view of it now is widening. And then after you get the beniso in place, now comes the boloso. The boloso is the back word. So now you're like the owl, the medunete, or the hieroglyphic symbol of M, wisdom and knowledge. Now you can turn your head around 360. Now you can see that point, but you can see it from all different angles. So that's how deep we're getting now as a people. These are the Dogon people teaching this. And if as educators we walked into the classroom knowing this with our children, As adults, if we knew this with our children, then what we would impart to them would run complementary to where they are. Now that bolo, so you didn't get until you got to be quite an elder. You're in your 50s and your 60s now when you start getting to understand the bolo. So same point, but a deeper point, deeper maturation. Now when you get that bolo so in place and you step up into the eldership, when you become that entity that now has experience, now you're introduced to so dai. So dai is the clear word or the spirit word. So what our ancestors were telling us was that you move through the front word to the side word to the back word, and then that back word comes up behind you and up through you, and it literally becomes who you are as a people. That becomes your nature of what Dr. Diep calls your cultural common sense. Now when we think of this, our children are born almost with a complement. They're born with all 4 levels, but they're very attuned to the so dai. They don't know it yet because they're not there yet. We know it as adults, but they don't know it. But they're born with so dai. They're born with that clear word, that deep word, that spirit word. But now what starts to happen is that we start to narrow them down.
Dumb them down.
That's what it is. And we take them from that clear word, now we take them to the back word. We take them to the side word, and now all they're living, as you speak of the intellectual glaucoma, now they only see the superficial word. Because the idea of contact, male and female, is the greatest gift that our Creator could have given us. The idea of a man and woman, 2 entities now becoming one, locked in a higher form of consciousness, bringing forward their own, reproducing their own, is a wonderful and most spiritual and sacred act. And it's being dirtied by people who know not what they say and do. They're dirtying it up. They're making it a hustle and a flow, as opposed to what our ancestors had it to be, and that is 2 humans coming together as one, becoming that androgynous being, and becoming God.
And what a trivial reason to be educated, you know, to be educated to work for someone else, when you don't actually need to devote all of your life to learning how to work for someone else. Gus Savage, who was, do you know Gus?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I met him one time in New York.
Well, Gus Savage was a representative, Illinois, state of Illinois representative. Before that, he was just an activist, you know, a real radical, as you would say. But he used to say, we had full employment during slavery. Working for other people has never been a problem. You know, when some of us were brought here to serve as slaves, they didn't have to teach us how to work. We knew how to work. We were the builders. As you said, we built the pyramids. We knew all about how to build. We knew all about how to sow. We knew how to cultivate. We knew how to harvest. We knew how to store. We knew how to teach. We knew medicine. We knew astronomy. We knew mathematics. We knew it all. So we didn't need to be taught how to work. What we were learning from our ancestors or from our kinship group was how to be in the society of which we were a part. But now we don't have any education to learn how to be, to learn who you are, and to learn how to relate to your fellow man and your fellow woman. Your education is, as you pointed out, to pass tests. Someone sat in a room and decided what was useful for you to know. And then they devised a curriculum based upon what they needed to have you not necessarily know, but to occupy your mind with, which is to me different from knowing. You know, just something to keep you busy work to keep you toiling away at trivia on the pretext that if you know this trivia, when it's presented to you in a test form with a paper and a pencil before you, you will be able to regurgitate this trivia and present yourself as one of the ones who is worthy of being employed to work for someone else. But the interesting thing is, a lot of us fell for that, and there are a lot of us who got all the pieces of paper, the bachelor's, the master's, and some the ABDs, almost doctorates, so forth, and they are unemployed. I know lots of people who are well educated, who speak, quote, standard English, who have experience and training, and they have nowhere to go when it comes to working for someone else. And so it's an illusion, isn't it?
It is.
That if you learn how to pass these tests and you pass these tests, that you will be made an honorary, educated person who will be able to get a job and sustain yourself.
Yes. And you will find your place in the society. Whereas all it is, it's like tapioca that you give to a baby, only to hush it up. It has no nutrients, it has nothing of value. It just keeps that baby in place from one moment to another. And that's what's happening in education. What we're teaching our children is of no use. The Moors had within their doctrine, if what you learned you can't use, you wasted your time attempting to learn it. Our young people are learning things that do not apply to them, which returns back to hustle and flow, because what they're seeing in that movie are things that other parts of their life may say exists, as opposed to giving them that well-rounded understanding of who they are. Because Hustle and Flow is a movie that could have been done on the enslavement of African people when you stop and think about it. If you took the storyline, took the characters, changed them around a bit, that's a story of anybody that you choose to enslave and their attempt to move out of that and find themselves. The storyline is there. Our children are absolutely brilliant, Dr. Peace. I needn't tell you, I know you know, but our children...
I'm the mother of some of them.
Oh my goodness. My experiences with them. You know, the amount of mental, intellectual energy that it takes to memorize the things that they memorize is the same intellectual a challenge that it takes to look at geometry or algebra or any of the other high sciences. Our children's care for their sneakers. If you, I saw a brother one time, you stepped on his sneakers, he took out a napkin and he licked that napkin and he did everything he could
to get that off.
He had pride in those sneakers, but brother, what about your mind? Imagine if you felt towards your mind the way you felt towards those sneakers, your priorities. You know, the jokes that we used to tell growing up about a Cadillac and a color TV, the way that we treat our cars. If we treated our internal spirit as we treated our cars, we'd be spotless. It's priorities. And it comes out of a concept of who we are and how we view ourselves. It comes into education and what we have to do in that building. And that's what teaching and working with the children in whole life management allowed me to do. It allowed me to move inside of themselves. I didn't have to worry about teaching them math and science and all those other nonsense things that they passed the test. The bottom line was, who are you? Where did you come from? Where do you want to go? What do you do well? What are you proud of? And we had a sister named Sandra Gums. She took the classes that I did not take. So she had all of the 8th grade, part of the 7th, part of the 6th, and we shared the same room. Sister Gums, brilliant sister, and together we saw things. I know why they do what they do. If I were them, I would do the same thing. If I knew what the potential of the future would be in those young African-American children, whether they speak English or Spanish or French or Dutch or Portuguese, whatever the language is. Because if you're from the Caribbean, Central South America, we're all one here. Only by matter of degree do we differ. When I saw what their potential was, I saw others looking at that potential. And if I knew that my survival and my children's survival, and if I was at a negative productivity, if I knew that my people had to take sterility, were sterile and had to take all these different kinds of measures that had them do litters. They're not having children anymore, they're having litters. They're doing what dogs and cats do. When you have 6 and 7 children at a time, that's not giving birth, that's given to a litter.
That's a whole nother dimension.
And what they're going to become in years to come, see, we don't know what's going to happen when their grandchildren mate with their grandchildren. We don't know what's going to be there. We don't even know what will be produced. We don't even know if they will be considered to be humans. So that these are the kinds of things that if I knew that I had to take fertility drugs, and yet I saw a people, well melanated, that could produce at astronomical rates with no difficulty, despite and in spite of all that we do to them.
Without Viagra.
Without any of that. This is us, and it goes back to science. We must study melanin. Melanin is a powerful molecule. Going back to the work of Dr. Richard King and Francis Cress Welsing, Carol Barnes, T.K. Moore, all of the melanists, all of them that have been speaking about this. We have to understand this in biology. I've often told children, or anyone else that's in biology, if you study biology and they haven't taught you about melanin, it's equivalent to studying auto mechanics and not understanding the role of gasoline in that car. Melanin makes you run the way gasoline makes a car run. Melanin is a powerful molecule. The carbon atom, light and heat energy. This is what we're talking about, an African-centered curriculum. They tried to jump on us and say this is ethnic cheerleading. All we want to do is celebrate Harriet Tubman and Imhotep. We want to clap for our people. The other thing they said, it was called ego starvation. They said that it was a feel-good curriculum. They said we just want to feel good about ourselves because they've told us so many different kinds of things. And the bottom line is that there is no curriculum that exists from my study of what we teach that is more feel-good, that is more ethnic cheerleading than the European curriculum. That doesn't do nothing but cheerlead their ethnic group and it make them feel real good about themselves. Unfortunately, it's not true.
Well, we have to distinguish between education and schooling. See, our children are going to get schooled. You know, they're going to get schooled in the street, they get schooled in the buildings, call the school. They get schooled by the TV. They're going to get schooled. It is our job as a community, as parents, and as elders to educate our children, because no one is going to do it for us. And when you talk about African-centered education, it begins with the child. The child is the center of his education. If he's not learning about himself, of what good is it at all? Because on the walls of the pyramid, the most ancient saying, know thyself. That's it. You know, you're going to go through the whole world, you're going to know all these fallacies about who discovered America, you're going to know all these fallacies about Africans coming to America for the first time on slave ships, when there are too many documents, there are too many books written to show that Africans traveled to this part of the world freely before it was even called America, came over and checked it out, spent some time with the so-called Native Americans, who of course were not Native Americans because this was not America. You know, they called it Turtle Island, and they called themselves Algonquin and Sioux and Choctaw and Chickasaw and all kinds of other names, but they never called themselves Americans, and they never called this America. And before the Europeans came and started misnaming everything and everybody, Africans had left all kinds of things that made us know that they had been, which is why all these books could have been written. And so we need to understand that it is it's a very serious matter, knowing thyself. And it is not in the interest of someone who is not a part of your kinship group to help you to know yourself. And especially if they don't know themselves. And it's pretty clear to me that they don't know themselves because they keep trying to be us. The most recent example I saw was of a group of Anglo-Saxon men trying to play the blues, you know, and they're having a big celebration of the blues at one of the blues clubs named for one of the black blues players and so forth, and they, you know, they had the mouth harp and they had the guitar and they had the hat on, and they for all practical purposes, you know, they were trying as hard as they could to emulate the soulfulness of the blues. White people can't play the blues. because the blues originated from lamentation. These were the expressions of our people when they had no other outlet for their expression. This was, we were expressing our experience, and we were expressing it in the only way that we could express it without fear of penalty of death or some other murderous thing happening to us. Europeans don't have that experience. So you imitate the form, you haven't got the content. No one can give the content of African-centered education except people of African descent. No one else can do it. They can do the form, they cannot do the content. It is not their experience. It is not their DNA. It is not in their cultural genes. It's our job, it's our duty, and we're the only ones who can do it.
Yes, absolutely. And I take that responsibility.
That's why I'm congratulating you.
And you also, Doctor, we all must take this responsibility. We all have to consider that it is our obligation, as you say, to make this happen in honor of our ancestors who put everything they had on the line. I'm embarrassed to even think we can't handle this. Considering what they went through, we have the right and the obligation to do it. I accept full responsibility for my contribution to what we're doing. And I ask no one else. When I was trying to get our curriculum in place, I did not go to a publishing house. I did not go to anybody else but John Henry Clark. And when I sat with him that October evening, and he said, go with it, I went with it. That was who I sought approval of. We must now turn inward and seek approval from ourselves.
But we must understand that our curriculum is not going to be adopted in schools that we do not control.
That's the bottom line. And that's why I'm here speaking to the community, not to the boards of ed. That's not where I'm coming from. I'm not going to deal with them, because what I would find and what I feel is that even if they were to choose to adapt it, they would do it so badly, I would end up wishing they never touched it.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, if you want to corrupt it, give it to someone who doesn't understand it.
And is afraid of it. When you speak of our presence here in America, the world community, right here in this state, there is evidence of Africans. Down in the southern part of Illinois, where the Y of the Mississippi comes together, it used to be called by the peoples present here, Cahokia. It's where they have what's called the mound. There's a book by a gentleman by the name of John Weather, and he wrote a book, and I'm sorry, Jack Weatherford. He wrote a book called Native Roots, Chapter 2, Pyramids Along the Mississippi. The largest pyramid in the Northern Hemisphere is located in Illinois. Along the Mississippi River, along the Mississippian culture of the original peoples, there are over 110 pyramids. There are 10 major cities along the Mississippi River. It's in that particular book by Jack Weatherford, Pyramids Along the Mississippi. And when you come to this part of the world, there is a gentleman from London, from England. His name is R.A. Jarasboy. He wrote a book called Ramses III, Father of Ancient America, where there's evidence, as Dr. Ivan Van Sertima has shown, that Ramses II had American tobacco in his stomach. There is evidence of lively trade. You see, our thing is we think that everything started happening post-1492. We don't know that there's evidence of Cristobal Colon, also called Christopher Columbus. There's evidence of him with the Portuguese in 1482 on the west coast of Africa, deriving information telling him that there's land to the west. Christopher Columbus knew exactly where he was going. He was a double agent, as Dr. Van Sertima. And I would encourage, don't necessarily believe me, go to a book called The Life of Columbus by John Boyd Thatcher, written in 1905, where you have Columbus's diaries talking to his son Diego, telling his son Diego to let his friend Alberigo Vespucci know where to go. When Columbus comes back from his first voyage, we find him in Paraiso, in Portugal. When he gets over to Spain, the Spanish crown says to him, why are you in Portugal? You're supposed to come back to us. He said he was shipwrecked. He was lying. What he was doing, he was giving evidence to the Portuguese as to where the Pope to Treaty of Tordesillas, the line of demarcation. That's why there are two lines. The first line was amended by the second line, which gives more of South America to the Portuguese. Portuguese got everything to the east, Spain got everything to the west of that line. So therefore, that's why Brazil is the largest continent, because he was a double agent for the Portuguese, because Cristobal Colon is married to Portuguese royalty. See, this is why history is so exciting.
You know, Crystal Morrison, and that's a name you want to remember, has done some very, very good primary research on Cristobal Colon. She has a book that is published by Native Son Publishers, and I don't want to misquote the title, but her name is Crystal Morrison, and it's the same research that you're citing here. And of course, you know, Van Sertima wrote They Came Before Columbus, and John G. Jackson has several chapters on ancient America in Man, God, and Civilization, and Lerone Bennett wrote Before the Mayflower. I mean, there are numerous books, not old books written on papyrus, but books published in my lifetime that documents the fact that Africans came to America on their own volition. Some of them stayed. How do you think Africans who ran away from plantations knew where to go? I just don't know whether or not people ought to consider the fact that you can't run away in a land about which you know nothing and hide and not be found. Obviously, there had to be some people for you to run to.
Yes, absolutely. And that history is there. This is why Dr. Clark used to always tell us that history was a clock that people used to tell their political time of day, and that it was a compass where people found themselves on the map of human geography. This is the African-centered curriculum that we're talking about. When you speak of searching out for yourself, finding yourself. Why were you born? Why you, of all the different people that you could have been with mommy and daddy, why were you chosen?
I'm very proud to have Professor Josef Ben Levi, who is here in the studio. He's just going to give you a preview of the second session of African-Centered Education in the remaining time that we have left, and I'm very happy that you were able to drop in today to share some of your insights, because I know that you are sitting there with an article that you wrote some time ago on African-Centered Education, so you are now officially an authority.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Peace. I'm glad to be here again as always. I always enjoy being here. And yes, this is an article I wrote on African-Centered Education for a magazine you once had, a newsletter you once had called Mo Better News, and this is from 1991. And you asked me to write an article on African-Centered Education, and I thought about it, and I put together some things. So I just want to share with the audience some of the ideas that I had since then, and of course where we are now. Man, this was 1991, and this is now what, 2005. So that's how old this is. But it's still, I think the ideas in here are still germane to what we need to look at when we considering African-centered education. One of the things I point out here, when we raise the question, what is African-centered education? I say it is essentially a system of learning which places African history, philosophy, language, and culture at the base of its educational position. And that's essentially what it is. We're talking about the contrast between the Eurocentric educational system that we have today. The Eurocentric educational system, of course, grew out of the ideas of people such as Charles Montesquieu. We had to look back at people like Frederick Hegel. These individuals, along later on with people like Count Auguste Joseph de Gobineau, who wrote Inequality of the Human Races, and various people like that. And later on, even in the contemporary times, we look at Thomas Jefferson's Notes on Virginia, and when we began to look at some of the other writers who developed these ideas that basically said that Africa had no place in human history or in human civilization. Well, once this stuff is perpetuated in the educational system, then we begin to get the ideas especially from those people who are in the process of learning to be educators. They are essentially taught these various ideas and these views, so consequently when they go out to teach, then they're teaching from the standpoint that Africa had no place in history, and since Africa had no civilization, therefore Africa is not important. So then when it comes time to teach our children are stuck in a situation where they're being taught the glories of ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and unfortunately there's no European thinker in education who would even begin to address the problem of education without going back to the works of the early Greeks and the Romans. They're not going to begin to talk about the importance of the value of education without beginning to talk about Aristotle, for example, in Aristotle's Ethics. Aristotle's Ethics talks about the importance of the good life. What is the good life and how can it be lived? Well, this is not really a new idea, this idea that they call in Greek ethike arete. Ethike arete literally means, and ethike is the word we get ethics from. Ethike arete literally means excellent character, or good character. Well, these are ideas that really go back to the works of people like Ptahhotep. Ptahhotep, who wrote wisdom literature 2,000 years before the time of Aristotle, was also addressing the idea of how does one go about living the good life. He talked about the term that they use in Medu-Neter, the ancient Egyptian language that is misnomer hieroglyphs. He talked about Medu-Nefer, the idea that you not only have good speech, but good speech is also about the idea of doing good too. And so when we lean upon the staff of the ancestors, we begin to get a better understanding of what it is that we must do as we go about learning how to live the good life. Well, living the good life involves a lot of things because there's also an intellectual component to the whole idea of ethics, what was referred to in European ethics as eudaimonic ethics, all right? That is, how do we go about doing good for our fellow man? And what things are required for us to do good for our fellow man versus what they call deontological thinking. Deontological thinking has more to do with whether or not I ought to do something for my fellow man. Mm-hmm. Well, this is more the idea of the Renaissance thinkers that came along. Well, when we go back and look at education, and again in European education wouldn't even begin to be relevant unless it went back to the works of the Greeks. Well, when we talk about African-centered education, then we must go back to the center of African civilization, the foundations of African civilization. The foundations of African civilization start with ancient Kamene, or the Nile Valley. When we go back to studying the Nile Valley, then we begin to see that there are many, many, many ethical traditions that grow that come from there that have been borrowed from them by the Greeks. This is clearly laid out in works like George G.M. James' Stolen Legacy. But if we also go back, we can look at the works of people like Edward Wilmot Blyden.
You know, I just keep getting these cues. And I'm just so sorry that I'm getting cues to tell me to interrupt you because I don't want to, and you are really going strong. But because I know that this is to be continued, and because I know that we will have as much time as we want to take to deal with this subject, then I can just, you know, I can say thank you for just sharing what you have shared. And know and assure my audience that you have not heard the last word on African-centered education from this brother, Josef Ben Levi. Hotel.